my YouTube channel. That's the first case, and then we can start, no problem. I hope in next minutes people will join. Sorry. Okay. Let me share my screen. I think you see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. Aydin, please help me with admitting the people. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Gašper, I'm always starting with one of the beautiful views of our lovely city of winds, Baku. This is Flame Towers, which has been built roughly, if I'm not mistaken, in 12 years. So it's the symbol of Baku.
So is that around the time when you had those sport games?
Which games?
Didn't Baku host this?
Yes, first European Olympic Games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, in 2015. In 2015.
15, okay.
Yes, in 20. And then, if I'm not mistaken, it took place in Belarus. If I'm not mistaken, yes, in Belarus. Yeah, these Flame Towers. And today's speaker is Gašper Kamenšek from Slovenia. And he will talk about Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power BI application rail case. And as for our next speakers, we are going to have Ken Pals from Canada. I think, okay. And Ken Pals also will talk about Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power BI application, but it will be related to sales, let's say, analysis, right?
So he stole my idea.
Actually, I asked him to deliver such kind of presentation speech because I attended his presentation, I mean session, something like this. And after Ken Pals, we are going to have Karen Abisha from Brazil. She will demonstrate how to build interactive dashboard on Excel. And she will do it based upon Azerbaijani statistical committee's import and export figures, numbers. So I think it must be very interesting. So I would like to thank you for your attendance, and I strongly believe that you will enjoy the session. And I also believe that we are going to, I'm just going to welcome you on our next meetup, which is going to take place on August 13th. So Gašper, I also thank you for accepting my offer. Now stage is yours. So
thank you.
Good luck. Good luck.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
So just let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so thank you, Ilgar, for inviting me. And this is going to be a presentation. It's going to be a labor market analysis. And you can see that there are parentheses there and it says part of. And I will explain that in a minute, but first let me just introduce myself. So my name is Gašper Kamenšek. I'm an Excel MVP. And I come from a country called Slovenia, which is the only country in the world that has the word love in the name. And I've been a speaker at multiple conferences. I even met Ilgar at an Excel conference. So it's a great way for us to mingle. I recognize a lot of people in the, a lot of attendees of this talk from exactly, conferences around the world. Tanya from Amsterdam, Rosita from Bulgaria, and so on, right? So this is a great way of kind of, getting together, particularly in these times when it's almost the only way to get together. And again, thank you, Ilgar, for putting this together. It's an honor to be here. And so let me just take a moment and explain the topic. So my topic would obviously be something like Ken's, doing a sales analysis, because that's easiest. We have like 7 data sets of that, ready to go in the back pocket always. And Ilgar asked me to do a labor market analysis, and that kind of put me in a weird spot, because labor market analysis, it can be difficult because it's such a broad topic, right? It includes so many different things. It includes employees. It includes the households. It includes so many different aspects of it: the employment, the unemployment, the job listings, the different, so many different things. And if I was going to do a real labor market analysis, that would just probably be me explaining the reports I did to you for about an hour, and still falling short, I guess, of explaining everything. And I thought that would not be as useful as what I ended up preparing for you guys. And that is, I'm going to do a labor market analysis, but on strictly one KPI, and that is employment rate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a blank Power BI sheet. And again, this session was introduced as Power Query, Power Pivot, Power BI. I'm kind of going to skip Power Query, Power Pivot, and use Power Query that is built into Power BI, and use Power Pivot that is built into Power BI. So I'm going to start with Power BI, blank file, and just go from there. And what we're going to do is the employment rate, and I'm going to focus on Slovenia as kind of the central numbers that I'm trying to get, and then comparing those to the neighboring countries. And for Slovenia, that would be Croatia, that would be Italy, that would be Austria, and that would be Hungary, right? So comparing the employment rate of Slovenia to those countries by year, and well, you're going to see. And let me just go through this slide deck. Now I'm going to mention that every year in normal times, I would have a conference. And the reason I'm actually showing you this is because this is exactly the conference where I met Ilgar for the first time. And this is where we got to talk, and this is where we got to talking about him actually creating his own conference in Azerbaijan, which then, fell short because of the whole situation. But I'm guessing it's only a matter of time in the future. Right, Ilgar? Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and so another thing that I do is I have a newsletter where I try to just keep up with Excel. I often get asked how I manage to keep up with Excel, right? Because it gets so many new features, it gets so many new things in different places. Like Excel Online gets a new feature, even Excel for Mac gets a new feature, Excel for phone gets a new feature, and then DXL that we all know and love, it gets a new feature. And how do you keep up with that? And my answer is usually I'm just thankful to God that I am an MVP, because the best thing about being an MVP is you usually know about things that are coming about 2 years in advance, which means that when they come out, you just say, oh, so that's out now, and you already know it. Honestly, if I was trying to keep up with the kids and everything in the job, I don't think I could. I don't think I could keep up with Excel and Power BI at the rate at which they're progressing at this point. Doing this newsletter is, in a way, something that I try to do, I put it out quarterly, and just so I get up to speed as to what is new, what just came out, and then, you know, explaining that, how that changes the entire game and so on. So lately it was about the new data types that came in Excel, because those will be a true game changer for companies, you know, for the employees. And anyways, so that would be my newsletter. And then I also have a YouTube channel now. This is fairly new. I only started in April, where I talk mostly about things that are close to me, and that would be Power Query, Power Pivot. I also do basic Excel stuff, simply because I think Excel has this problem that people often learn it themselves, or they learn it by somebody showing them how he does it, and not necessarily showing them how it should be done. So I also try to do this series of videos that is called Hit the Ground Running in Excel, which should be everything you need to know to kind of approach Excel in the right way. Anyways, enough about that. And now let's go to the case at hand. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about employment rates, and the data is all gathered from the Eurostat webpage. Now I can probably, oh, there he goes. Let me see if I can. I cannot. So let me go to this one. And let me copy this. And I'm just going to put this. So if anyone actually decides to follow along, I'm going to put this in the chat. So there it is. Slovenia are having good Olympic Games. That is true. For such a small country, we're having a great Olympic Games. Okay, so this is the data that I started with, and let me just show you where I got it. So it's this web page, and whereas again, if I was doing the entire labor, analysis, I would need most of these data sets. But I only went for employment rates as an example, and I'm going to take it from 0 to 60, which was mentioned at some point. So I'm really going to dig into this one, but you can translate what I'm going to do to all the other cases and then build a model from there. And looking at this, I went for this one. I really don't know why. It just kind of looked as most fun. So it's employee rates by gender, age, educational attainment, and citizenship. Now, citizenship I'm not going to touch, but the others I will. And I also did something that one should never do, and I just downloaded the file from here, which is it's basically a tab-separated values format, which is not recognized by Power BI, but that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is this comes in one of those strange zip formats, which you didn't have to unzip and all that. The much easier route would actually be to go to the data browser. You would get to something like this. And the reason this would be much easier is where you could actually put some filters on it if you wanted to. But more importantly, you could just download whichever format you would want. But I went for the hard one, for the tab separated, just so we're going to have lots of fun trying to put this together. And let me just show you how the file looks. So this is the file that I ended up with. Brilliant file. So it basically has separate columns, and you can see that they're comma separated up to a point, and then they're tab separated from here on out. So the values are tab separated. And then it also has some very, very weird stuff in it. Now, there is, if you go to the site, and I think I even have it up here. Let me just find it. So there is, certain flags that are next to the data, or there's only a flag in the cell, which tells you what that actually means in your data. And these you can see as U, BUs, Cs, and Ps. Don't see any Ps here, but they are somewhere. And the trick here will be getting rid of all of this, right? So cleaning this up so it becomes usable for us. And also, what I'm going to try to do as I'm going to compare Slovenian data to the neighboring countries, I'm also going to try to create a comparison by decade. So what I'm going to say is, okay, it's 2021. Compare the data of right now to 2011. And now, sometimes that's actually useful data. But the main reason why I decided to do that is so I'm going to need a calendar table, right? So if you want to do, period to period or period over period comparisons, you need your calendar table. And that will be a lot of fun creating that in Power Query. Okay, so without further ado, let's just jump into it. So we're going to start with a blank Power BI file. The only thing I did to this Power BI file, just so we don't lose time afterwards, is I added 2 visuals, which I swear by is the Zebra BI visuals, because we're going to do comparisons, and that's just how you do comparisons. So those are added here, but the rest of it is just a blank file. And now we're going to go get data. And what I also did is, remember when I told you that it's a kind of an obscure file type. So I did change that into a TXT just by using Notepad++, nothing fancy. So this is the file that I'm going to select. I'm going to say open. And of course, the shape in which it will come, it will not be usable. So we will have to do some transformation, which is your Power Query, right, in Power BI. So let's do transform data. And we get to this. Now it did the change type thing. This is where if you're building a solution, right, and you point to a file, now the case in your mind has to be how to create a solution that will be dynamic. So next year, I just override the file, refresh it, and it will work. And that's where you also need to be careful as to what if next year a column gets added or taken away. This change type step could be a problem then. So you need to keep these things in mind. Now, I'm not going to go into the change type as it's only 6 columns. I'm not going to, bother with this. But if this year's were actually split into columns, then that would be a problem. But it's not a problem as it stands. So I'm going to leave it as is. And the first thing I'm going to do is you can see how this column actually contains multiple columns, right? So these were the ones that were split by a comma, if you remember when I showed you the data set. Now these are split by tabular, so by tabs. And what I need to do here is I need to get this split up. Usually what I would do in a column that has text, that has multiple text and looks like this, is I would always do a transform, format, and trim. So the only thing the trim does is it gets rid of all unnecessary spaces. So it cuts all the spaces before text, after text, and it makes all the spaces in between a single space. That is just something I like to do as a precaution more than anything else. And you can see that it actually did nothing here, but still, it is a step that I strongly encourage you to use. And then, of course, what we would do is we would split this. So let's split this column, and we're going to split it by delimiter. and the delimiter will be tab. It's going to notice that and each occurrence and just go okay. And we're going to get something like this, right? And at this point, you can see that the first row is as ready as it is, right? That's going to be my header row, and I'm going to make it a header row immediately. At this point, I am going to get rid of the change type step. Now, the reason being is you can see that this data is kind of all over the place, whereas it should be percentage points. So this should be like 44%, 23%. It's actually not just numbers. It's a bunch of, it's even columns and text. So it's so many different things. And this change type, in my opinion, doesn't even know what this is at this point. So it says it's all text. And, it could be, but this one I would usually get rid of for the same reason I told you before. So what it does here, it says, column 2003 type text. Now, what if next year, the file that I'm going to override it with, I'm just going to take from 2000 up to 2022. That would be a problem, right? This step would fail. So these kind of steps, I would usually just remove the change type steps. And the next thing that I would do is trying to clean this up. And I'm going to do it the simplest way possible. So I'm just going to select everything and I'm going to do a bunch of replace values, right? So I'm going to replace value. First, I'm going to go for the U and replace with nothing. Then I'm going to replace values, go for the colon, replace with nothing. And then I'm going to go replace values, go for the B, replace values again, go for the C, and then replace values again and go for the P. Now, all of these, mind you, all of these, they do have a purpose for being there. Now, I got rid of that, but the U actually stands for that is unreliable data, which is important, right? In the end, if I do a report and I can kind of highlight those with conditional formatting or something, that would be important. So sometimes retaining these would be, in my best interest, but I choose not to right now. So this is what I end up with. And right now, there could be spaces in there, and you probably can guess where this is going. I'm just going to do a trim again, right? Because these need to be numbers only. And then, as I said these need to be numbers. So I have them all selected. So let's just say these are numbers. At this point, as you can see, they're separated by, so the decimal separator is a period, right? It could be a comma. It depends on where you're from. It depends on what your regional settings are on your computer. Now, mine are set up in a sense that this will actually show up as a decimal number without a problem. But if that wasn't the case, this would actually be much harder to do because you would have to go change using locale and then saying this comes from the US or something. And again, this could be omitted if I went for the smart way of getting data. So if I went through this, right? Because over here, you can also say in a format what should be your decimal symbol, right? And you just choose the one that suits your data, that fits with your data. But again, this one was perfect for me with my settings. And now I have the percentage points where they stand. And I have the years kind of strangely as columns. And what I would need is actually just two columns. One would be the year and another would be the value for that year. And I'm going to achieve that by simply going for all of these 6 columns, right click, and unpivot other columns. So unpivot other columns will create two columns, one with the year that I'm actually going to change into a date. So I'm also going to rename this into a date, and another one with the value, and I'm just going to leave that one be. Again, keep in mind, remember all those nulls that we saw before? We just got rid of those. So if there's no data, we don't have that here. This, again, could, get some consideration, could get some input into this. But as I went through the process, this is how I did it. And I just gave the title date to this column, but you can obviously see it's just a year at this point, and it's a string. But I'm going to make use of that by doing a transform, by doing a format. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a prefix to this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say put 1 dot in front of that, right? So create a date out of that. Again, this is where you have to be careful. The original settings do come into this, and you need to, if you're using, whichever format of dates you're using, that's the one that you should be going for here. In Slovenia, this is what we use. Okay, so now I can make this a date, right? And this is more or less the data that I'll be working with. So this, I'm going to say, is employment rates. Right, this will be my main table. And now, if I was only going for showing this, I could actually start with this. But I want to take this further. And where I want to take this is, remember when I said before, I also want to compare to previous periods. I'm actually going to go a decade back. But, if we had monthly data, if we had quarterly data, you could really have fun with that. And then you could also, bring in all the big crises of 2008 and similarly, and just put that on your data. And then what you would need is some sort of a calendar. And that is exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to reference this table. I'm going to call it a calendar, and then go through the process of, this is the only column I need. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to remove other columns. And now I'm going to do this. So hopefully you can now see everything much bigger, because I'm going to write some things over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another duplicate column from this one. And that one I will make, or actually, let me start differently. Before I do a duplicate, I'm going to get rid of all the duplicates within the column. That is just so I have a much smaller profile of a column before I start duplicating it and doing stuff to it. And as you can see, because every time it's going to try to do this, it's going to spin off the original query, which has the unpivot command. This is going to sometimes take a while. So these sort of steps of, removing duplicates before you go onwards sometimes do make a difference. Depends on the query folding, honestly. Okay, so these are the years that we're working with. It goes from, I think, 95 up to 2020. And now I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to duplicate this column. And I want to call the duplicate column that I get date 2. So I'm just going to make that change straight in the code. I'm not even going to rename it afterwards, creating 2 steps unnecessarily. So create a duplicate of this one, call it date. And what I'm going to do with this duplicate is I'm going to transfer all the dates to the final date of the year. So the big picture, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the smallest date in here the largest date in that second column, which will be the end dates, and then creating a flow of dates from this to this, right? This will be my min date, this will be my max date, and that is the basis of my calendar. It's very strange that you actually have to do that, but that is how calendar has to look within your data model. And the reason it's strange is because we only have the first January 1st of each year. That's the only date that we actually have, but still you need to create your dates or your calendar date column by those rules. So I'm going to go this end of year, and now we're very, very close to where we can actually start working with this. It's going to take some time at this point, but we only have about 7 steps to go. And 4 of those will be brilliant. So it's a good thing we have so much time to take it in. Now let me try to make this bigger again. Okay, so now I got the 2 columns of dates, and now I'm going to do something that you probably didn't expect me to do. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to go to data type, and I'm going to say these are actually whole numbers. Now, if you are not aware that every date is just an index number or a whole number, then you need to brush up on your Excel basics. But it's similar to Excel, right? The number that you see is from January 1st of 1900, just the index number of the date that you see. So how many days passed between January 1st of 1900 up to this date? So these will now get translated into whole numbers. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for the smallest number in here, the largest number in here, and then we're going to create a list of dates listing all the numbers from that smallest number to that largest number, right? So now we have these numbers, and now we're going to grab this first one, and I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to rename this to base step, as this is the one that I'll be working on from here on out. And over here on the first one, I'm just gonna look for the smallest number. Now, you could do this 2 ways. One would be by sorting this column and then saying, give me the first value in that column. But I much prefer kind of a function way of doing it. So saying, give me the minimum of those values. And I particularly love it because then you can easily translate it into now give me the maximum of the second column. And I'll show you what I mean right now. So if I take this column and I say transform this by using statistics and give me the minimum of that, right? It will just say, give me the list dot min. So all the values in that column, find the minimum in the column base date. Now, base is just the name of the step that it takes as the image that it sees, and the date is the column that it takes as that. And now I'm going to do this. So you can see that it wrote a code saying something like list.min base date. Now, if I did something like this, if I went list.max on date 2, you know what that would be, right? That would be the largest number. Then if I just add curly braces here and here, go like this, this is actually going to create a list of numbers from that smallest one to that largest one. So this will be the first number that we're going to see, and then we're just going to see 701, 702, and so on, up to the largest number that was in the second column. And at this point, we're very, very close to the end result. Now, usually, when you create your calendar table, it has multiple columns. Now, the base calendar table usually has at least year, month number. You need that one to sort your month names. And then you have the weeks. Sometimes you will have the name of the day, so weekday. And sometimes you'll also have a number for the weekday, so you can, again, sort the names. And that would usually be your basic calendar. And then the quarter, that would usually also be present. Now that I got this list of numbers, which are actually dates, I'm going to convert it back to a table. The reason I'm doing that is so I can assign a type of data to this column, which will then be date, and it's just going to translate them back. But from what I was saying before, this date, or actually the calendar that we need, will be much simpler than that one. And that one is even the simplest that it usually gets, because then you would have your, rolling indexes and stuff like that added to your calendar table. But we're just going to go for the two columns. The first one will be date. That's the one that every calendar needs. And then if we think about the granularity of our data, which is yearly, so it's annual data, that is also something that we need. So our calendar table will be date and year. And we're very close to that. So as soon as this gets converted to a table, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to rename this column to date. We're going to change the type of this data to date, shockingly. And then we're just going to add the column year, and that will be it. That will be our calendar table. But again, I hope that you notice the brilliance of this, right? We took some pieces of dates, which were all January 1st, but they could be anything. And then we translated that into a list of dates from January 1st, the first year that our data exists, to December 31st, the last year that our data exists, and listing all the dates in between, which is the basis of your calendar. Since we only have one table, this could be achieved, and some might argue it could be much easier achieved by creating a DAX calendar, so just calendar auto, using the function calendar auto. And I would say that is right. But this is much more powerful, and this also gives you the ability, once you have multiple tables with multiple date columns, to say, take this date column from here, take this date column from here, append it, take this date column from here, append it, and now use exactly what I showed you on this column of dates, right? So this becomes much more useful once you have multiple tables that will be your fact tables. Whereas the calendar auto, if it sees any hours or any time columns in your tables, what it would create is a calendar that goes from January 1st, 1900, which, just doesn't do any good to anyone. Okay, so we're just one step away from this calendar creation in Power Query. So far what we did is we turned this into dates. We're just waiting for that one to roll in. And then we're just gonna add the year from that date. So the column year, as I said before, we're only gonna have two columns in this calendar. Okay, so these are our dates. And now we're gonna say, add a column by using the dates from this one, add a year, and that's it. So this will be our calendar table that we're going to use. We're just going to wait for it to spin, and then we're going to load it, and that's where the fun starts, right? So the first thing we're going to have to do, I think we're going to have to do it, maybe it's going to do it by itself, but usually I have that option turned off because it can do strange things. So the first thing we're going to have to do is connect these two tables into a model. So create a connection from the fact table, the employment rates, to the calendar. And then what we're going to have to do is create our measures and finally visualize our data, right? Because thus far, all we saw was a table and some magic that we did with it to get to our data. And this is where things get really interesting. So once we're going to have this loaded and we're going to have our model created, that's when we're going to have to think about how to calculate our employment rates. And it's not as easy as it might seem just out of the box, because there are certain measures that are additive, or certain things that are additive in, in your calculations. And there are certain things that are not, and percentage points are definitely not, right? And the problem we have is we have such granulation. We have, for 2015, let's say, we have data by age, we have data by education, we have data by gender, right? So 2015, if we just show the year and say, do something with that values column, it's going to do strange things if you just let it, because maybe it will just do a sum on it. And that, of course, is very wrong. So we're going to have to think about that. And we're also going to have to think about, once we do our base query, how to create what we want it to do. So at this point, we have all the countries in there, right? We didn't strip any data away. We didn't say, just give me the countries that I need. I left all of them in there. If someday maybe I'm going to use them. But for now, what I want to do is create a measure that will be for Slovenia, and then compare that to the neighboring countries. So that's what we're going to do. And as I said before, the first thing we're going to do is say, this is the date and this is the date. So drag from the fact to the dimension, as it should be. And now let's try to get into this. So we have our calendar table here, and obviously we're going to do it by year, right? So year will be our base column by which we're going to slice and dice things. And now we go to the employment rates, and now we go for the, how should we write, the measure that's going to return the employment rates. And there's a case here to be made for lots of different measures, but I'm just going to go with this one. And the reason I'm going to go with this one, so first, let me explain. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say employment rate, Slovenia, which is SI, and I'm going to say, or actually, first I'm going to do employment rate base. So I'm just going to do a base query of employment rate, which I'm then going to use for each subsequent measure that I'm going to create. And this one will be a simple average, right? So you can't sum them up, but you can average them. It makes more sense, although this is where some things get very important. Do we have zeros in there? If we do, that's very bad. Are they nulls? Because if they're nulls, then the average will omit them. And there are nulls here. So we can go with this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go for the value. There it is. So this will be our base query. And if I just show this one, right? So it is something, but at this point, what is this? Well, it's not anything that would tell us anything, right? Because it's an average of, first of all the countries, by all genders, by all age groups, by all education groups, by everything. And then we even have a strange situation here, which deliberately I left in there, where, the gender is not just male and female, but it's also the total, right? So there's a lot of that going on here, and just these averages are actually meaningless. But first, let's do this. Let's say, okay, So this is a query that does something. It gives me a number, and now I want that number only for Slovenia. So let's create that to begin with. And that will look like this. So I'm going to say employment rate Slovenia, and that will be your calculate. So we're going to calculate. What are we going to calculate? Well, we're going to calculate our employment rate base. Now I did a boo-boo here. This should always include the table name. Now you should always stick to that. Since I only have a single fact table, I'm not really worried about that, but you should always think about it like that. And then I'm going to say, so in the employment rate, there's a geo time column. And if that one says SI, I know that that means that that is actually Slovenia. So this will now calculate employment rates for Slovenia, right? And you can see there's for 95, there is no data for 95, which means we're getting somewhere, right? So this is just Slovenia. And now let me create a similar one, which will be something like this. Or actually, I'm just going to go with this one. So let me turn this into something much more usable. So something like this. And let me turn this into something like this. Okay, this doesn't look so bad. I'm going to sort it ascending. And of course, I'm going to do that by year, right? So I have my years down there. And then let's get to cleaning this. So the first thing I'm going to do is 1995 doesn't really mean a lot to me. You know, it's so far back. So for the year, I'm going to say it should be greater than, and let's say 1999. So just start with 2000 and onwards, right? So this is something now. So now we have this, right? And now let's go to our base measure. And our base measure is basically still working on the entire data set. But now I can go and I can say, well, why don't I give a geo time slicer up here, right? And with this one, I could start doing something. With this one, I could say, okay, I only want the neighboring countries, right? So what I would want is I would want Austria. I would want Croatia, which is spelled HR here. So it's Hrvatska, that's the original name, or actually the name that they would use. And then Hungary, and there's Italy somewhere down here. There it is. So Italy is down here, and I'm going to omit Slovenia up here. All right. So I'm going to say these are the only ones that I want to see, right? So if I now select these, right, what's happening here? Well, the original measure is staying up. So let me go here and let me change this so it will be a drop down like this. I will say let's compare to Austria. Okay. And then over here, I have what? Well, basically, I have, well, it's kind of wrong. So I will have Slovenia as values, and then I will have Austria at this point as a previous year, so shown as previous year. But this is why I love Zebra BI so much, because it already calculated the percentage points of percentage points, funny enough, differences, right? So that is very cool that I can say, well, this is the percentage point difference between the two on 2011. I didn't need to create a measure for that, right? To calculate that. And if I just split this axis a bit so I can see this better, this kind of looks something. It looks, well, it looks cool, but it's still wrong. It's very, very wrong. Because at this point, what is this actually showing? Well, you know, it's even hard to tell, because it's all age groups, it's all genders, it's all, I think it's the educational guidelines. So it's everything, right? And now let's fix that. So let's say, well, this will be my kind of the basic comparison I want to do. So at this point, what I would like to do is this. I would like to have the gender and just have a filter on the entire page. So I know everything is just the total, right? So there is no male and female numbers here, just the totals. And then for the age groups, I'm not going to look at, you know, all of these. I'm just going to look at one, and that will be from 20-year-old to 64-year-old, which would be your working class usually. And then, so the citizen, I'm not going to get into that. I don't even know if there's a, oh, there is a total. So let's just go for that one. And then we have the last one, which is the education. Let me just find it. Right, and there's a lot of things here, but I'm going to go for the total. So at this point, I'm going to ignore all that underlying granularity that I have, you know, different education levels, different genders, and just say, give me the totals everywhere. So this is now getting somewhere. So now I have a comparison of Slovenia to all the other countries, and this is actually interesting, right? The employment rates, okay, against Austria, it looks like a disaster, but against other countries, looks kind of cool. Well, looks cool to be a Slovenian, I guess. But now let's take this a step further. So let's say, okay, well, this is good, right? But now let's say, let's create a duplicate of this. And let's say on this one, I want to do it differently. On this one, I will not filter the gender out. I will much rather use the gender to create small multiples and have something like this. Now, maybe there is a case to be made that the total doesn't even, you know, is not needed here. So I'm going to remove it. And I'm only going to go for the original genders. So the male and female. And now this looks even more interesting, right? Look at the male ratio. And now if I go, so how does that look with Croatia? How does that look with Hungary? And this one says a lot, right? And this is where you can kind of see the cultural differences even coming in and explaining this data, which now becomes something. And if I just go one step further, so I'm going to duplicate this one again, because it's the best way to start. And at this point, I'm going to choose to get rid of the age levels, right? So I just said from 20 to 64. Well, I'm going to get rid of that now. And I'm going to instead put age groups into small multiples. And here I can now, if I'll ever find them, filter out those that are actually interesting to me. Now, a lot of ways this could have gone. I'm just going to go like this. I'm going to go 15 to 39, then give me 40 to 59, and I hope we have something from there. Oh, we have nothing from there. Okay, let's do it differently. Let's go 15 to 24. And then let's find something like 25 to 49. And then let's go 50 to 64, right? And this is where the data gets really interesting, right? Because now we can say, oh, so for young people, we're actually better. Well, not for extremely young people, but you know, in the heart of the the working group, we're actually better. It's only with the older people and with the youngest people is where we are kind of falling behind Austria. And then you go for Croatia, you go for Hungary, and this is where things get really, really interesting. And with a simple data set with 2 measures and a single table of data, and the calendar that I don't know if it even deserves the name because it only has 2 columns, you can now create really, really amazing stuff. And let's just do one more here because I promised it. And let's say, well, this is all cool, but now I lost some data, right? I had data down to 1995, and I'm going to try to actually make this even better. I'm going to say the year should be greater than 2005 and apply this. All right, so I only have the last few years, but now I'm going to say, and now show me on the same chart, show me the data for a decade ago, just for Slovenia. Right? So I'm going to go new measure. And I'm going to say, so employment rates, this will be Slovenia. And this would usually be previous year, but now it's going to be previous decade. Have you ever written that before? And I'm going to go, so it's still calculate, of course, it's the Slovenian employment rates. And then we go, let me make this bigger. We go date add. And we say, so calendar date obviously is our base column for dates. I want to go back 10, and the unit that I want to go back by is years. So that one gets there like this. And now, and let me see, I probably should add it like this. So this should go here, and then this should go here. Yeah, there it is. Now that is extremely cool, right? So now I have in one chart, I have so this is compared to Austria, right? So this is the Slovenian numbers for, I'm not really sure, but I think it's 2019. These are the Austrian numbers for 2019. And these are numbers for Slovenia a decade ago. So that would be your 2009, right? And I think this kind of puts into perspective the power of, just data modeling and how much data you can actually derive from something like this, right? This is my table. And I was able to play with each and every column in here, except for, well, the one that we really didn't go into was the educational units, but still, we could. But as a proof of concept, I think this is kind of the to where I'm going to take it in this session. And since I only have 50 seconds left, I'm definitely only going to take it to this level. Now, let me just see, because I always create I always create one for myself. If everything goes terribly wrong, it's slightly different because I still have it down to 2000, but it is by gender, it is by age. It's kind of the same thing. Okay, so here I did something a bit more drastic. So I left the age differences all in there, but then on a single report, let me just make that one bigger so you can see it clearly. But then on a single report, I can also go, now show me that for women only, now show me that for men only, now show me that as a total, right? And this, very, very interesting. And in some cases, right? Because you can see the differences just jumping around, and this should be extremely, extremely, brilliant to you if you think about it. We started with nothing 40 minutes ago. And I'm going to stop at this and just questions. Oh, so Stephen has a question. I will actually need to check that. Just so I don't write it. I don't write it wrong. Let me just check that if it's, I think it's, yeah, it's newsletter.excelolympics.com. I'll just put it in the chat. There it is.
I think, Gašper, you have to one more. It's something like Excel Unplugged. Is it active or?
So Excel Unplugged is my blog.
Yes.
Excel Olympics is the company that I run, where I offer consulting gigs and courses and things like that. And Excel Olympics, sorry, also has a newsletter and the YouTube channel tied to it. Whereas Excel Unplugged is only my blog. So that one, I just, it's Excel related or Power BI, depends on my, the way I get up in the morning. But it's not, I kind of keep it apart. I couldn't even tell you why, but yeah, so there are two pages. The blog side of it all is mostly Excel Unplugged, whereas the Excel Olympics was supposed to be the business side of it. But now it has a newsletter and the YouTube tied to it, so that is debatable. Oh, Oz.
Yes.
Great to see you, and thanks for that.
Did it? Oh.
Oh, there you go.
Good morning.
You know, Oz, I have to